Hello and welcome to the virtual Six Bridges Literary Festival. We're really glad that you've joined us this afternoon. I'm Mary Horne and I'm the owner of Tribe Psychotherapy, Yoga, and Wellness. In my work, I help people heal from difficult life events. And that's one reason I'm especially glad to be here today to talk with our authors. We'll be speaking today with two people who experienced a tragedy in their lives and then wrote about their experiences with the hope that their stories could help others going through difficult times. A central theme for both of these authors is that even though bad things happen, life can still be good and faith can pull you through. Before we get started talking to our authors, let me just get a little housekeeping piece out of the way. If you'd like to ask a question, and we hope that you will, please open your chat box and type it in there, and I'll keep an eye on the questions and try to ask as many of them as I can. So feel free to chime in. Now on to the main event. Mark Saviers and Tommy Foltz are our guests today. Mark is a native Arkansan who has been married to his high school sweetheart, Vicki, for more than 4 decades. They have 2 grown sons, Marshall and John Mark, and 4 grandchildren. He's the partner in charge of asset strategies at Sage Partners, a commercial real estate firm. His book, Flipped, is the story of how God helped the author's brother-in-law, Tommy Van Zandt, survive and thrive after a tragic accident, and how faith, family, friends, and community came together to create triumph over tragedy. Tommy Foltz is also a native Arkansan. In his work life, he has spent 25 years in public relations, marketing, and management in the energy industry. He has been published numerous times in newspapers in the South, including a sports column for the Northwest Arkansas website, bestofarkansassports.com. His affinity for writing led him to use this medium to help him process the death by suicide of his 13-year-old son that occurred in 2014. His book, Forward, details that struggle and the journey of healing from an unimaginable loss through the support of his family and community. Even in the first hours after learning of his son's death, he tried to remain positive, and he rejoices in watching the growth of his other son, the fraternal twin brother of the son he lost. So without further ado, let me give a warm welcome to Mark and Tommy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Glad to see you both today. Mark's going to start us off by reading an excerpt from his book, and we'll move to some questions from me and then also from you, hopefully. And just on a note, as we get started, Mark's brother-in-law who inspired his book is named Tommy Van Zandt. And we also have Tommy Foltz as our guest today. So just as you're listening, try to keep that clear in your mind of which Tommy we're talking about. If I need to clarify, I'll help that out. So let me just set the stage here for the passage that Mark is going to read. In 2009, his brother-in-law, Tommy Van Zandt, fell off a ladder and broke his neck. He was 49 years old. He was healthy. He was happily married to his wife, Robin, and had 2 teenage sons. And in an instant, their lives were radically changed. As you can imagine, he faced numerous health challenges. He was on a ventilator. He couldn't breathe on his own. He had tape over his mouth and was only able to communicate during those first several days by blinking. So this passage that Mark is going to read is called Beyond Blinking. And it's the first time that Mark gets to see Tommy when Tommy can speak again. So Mark, if you want to go ahead and read us that passage, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. I will amplify by saying that this is about 7 weeks after the accident occurred.
Okay.
And we are in the first month after the accident. Tommy was in Washington Regional Hospital in Fayetteville. So now he's been transferred to Craig Hospital, which is a rehab hospital in Denver, and he's 3 weeks into it. So I'm going to see him, and that's where this conversation happened. This is called Beyond Blinking. It's page 61 and 62 of my book. My second trip to spend time with Tommy in Denver was dramatically different from the first. For starters, Tommy didn't even remember that I'd been there for 2 days only a couple of weeks before. He knew that my trip was unscheduled due to Robin's illness, and he also knew that Robin was feeling better by the time I arrived. More importantly, Tommy was now able to have real conversations. They had fitted Tommy's trach with a cuff, which allowed him to talk while he was on the ventilator. It almost felt like a loved one who had died had come back to life. After all the time standing over his bedside, his mouth taped shut, it was a huge relief just to hear him express his thoughts. After weeks of communicating with him by blinking, now he could talk. And if there's one thing Tommy likes to do, it's talk. First of all, you don't need to be here, he told me shortly after I arrived. I'm doing much better, and the staff here is great. You have too much to do to stay here with me. That was awesome. Tommy was trying to take charge, being bossy. That first conversation lasted 3 hours, interrupted by the almost constant stream of caregivers. He told me that he was kicking butt now. He was optimistic and he was ready to fight. He told me how his boys had taken care of him all weekend. He especially bragged on Jack, describing how attentive and helpful he had been. We also talked about a few real estate deals and his concerns about their family financial picture. Mostly he talked about the many people who had touched him. Finally, late in the conversation, I felt compelled to ask Tommy the question that had been on my mind for many weeks. Tommy, I said, how did you fall? He explained that he was using a chainsaw to cut a heavy limb off a big tree in his backyard. When the limb was partially cut, the end of it swung down hard and knocked the ladder he was standing on out from under him. It happened so fast that Tommy's thought was to throw the chainsaw away from him, but he flipped in the process, landing on his head. I stared at him in silence for a moment. Anger welled up inside of me. I knew the tree he was describing. To me, in pre-spring March, it was barren and ugly anyway, and now I hated it. I hated it for what had happened under it to Tommy and to our whole family. I hated it for what it represented. And in my mind, none of us should ever have to look at it again. Tommy, will you let me cut down that damn tree? I said. Tommy stared at me for a moment. Not right now, he said. I accepted his answer, even though I didn't like it. Perhaps he would think about it some more and relent later. I never brought it up again, and Tommy didn't either. Looking back, I know Tommy never intended to have that tree cut down. He recognized the beauty of that tree from better times. He had seen it during beautiful sunrises and sunsets, leafed out in full glory. Perhaps those memories symbolized that better times were coming for him and for the tree.
Thank you, Mark. That passage speaks so much to me about how there's this sense of even then looking forward to better times, but also having to face the reality. Our anger at what's happened is oftentimes our defense against this very real and horrible thing that has happened for us. And we want to get rid of or strike back at something that's caused it to happen. I wanted to ask Tommy, do you want to read a passage from your book as well?
Sure.
Okay.
This is, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you good.
Okay. This is a passage from an incident that occurred that I'll tell you about here in just a second, but it's an incident where I flew down to Houston where my job was and ended up having to come back that day and deal with the situation. So that's this part of the chapter called The Bird and the Tree. About a month or so after the wrist cutting incident, I was in my office in Houston around 5 o'clock and had only been there for a few hours after flying in from Little Rock. I got a call from Tiffany telling me I needed to come home. I was livid. I'd been in Houston since about noon, and better be a damn good reason for me to get back on a plane, right back to where I came. There was a good reason. I got online to buy a ticket. I got on the plane and I had a beer as soon as I did. I arrived at my house about 10 p.m. and what I found were hundreds of large and small shards of glass covering my kitchen floor. In a fit of rage, Will had thrown Tiffany's keys into the yard so she couldn't find them, leaving her stranded. The fact that he thought about doing this, keeping her stranded so that he could ride off on his bike is scary. And it shows you how bright he was, and it makes you know there was a plan. In cleats, football pants, and no shirt, he jumped on his bike and rode to my house. As I've said, my house is not far. However, it requires crossing Cantrell and University, which is one of the busiest intersections in Arkansas at rush hour, and it was just before rush hour. I'll never know exactly what route he took, but there's no way to get from there to my house on a bike without seriously putting yourself in harm's way. When he got to the house, he went around the back, found a rock, and hurled it through my kitchen window, shattering glass everywhere. It's a miracle he didn't get cut crawling through to get inside. If he'd done this just for a place to hide from his mom, I would have laid into him like never before. But that was not the goal. The goal was to get into my gun locker and take his own life. Fortunately, the keys to the gun locker were on my key ring, where they always were. And that key ring was in my pocket in Houston. This was by design as a precautionary measure because we knew what Will might be capable of. He had gone into my office and did everything he could to get it open. He beat it with a hammer relentlessly. He also tried to use a knife to pick the lock. Finally, in a mixture of frustration and exhaustion, he gave up and called his mother to say sorry through tears and asked for her to come pick him up. I'll never forget how surreal it was to be standing in my kitchen, staring at the glass on the floor and thinking to myself, who's going to pick up these pieces besides me? As I picked up the glass, I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like, would have looked like to a bird in a tree watching a 13-year-old boy in a fit of rage breaking into his father's house with the intent to kill himself.
Thank you for reading that to us, Tommy.
Sure.
Kind of brings me to ask a question about the process for each of you in writing this book. Mark, you had written that you started a journal from the beginning because you really had a sense that it would be important to chronicle what was happening. And Tommy, you being a writer, it seems like this is something that you, wrote about after the fact, but also have been writing ever since then. And I'd like to maybe ask each of you to talk a little bit about the process in writing your book. And what it was like and has been like to go back through these difficult experiences. I like a quote from writer Natalie Goldberg, who says, writers live twice. And in some ways that can be a good thing, but when you're going back through such difficult experiences, that must be really challenging. So I'd like to just hear each of you speak a little bit about that.
Tom, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Well, as you said, Mary, I initially started with a series of journal entries, and over time, our situation got better. And so to answer your direct question, it was not a painful experience for me to go back. Basically, I had a year's worth of journal entries, notes from friends, emails, pictures. So to go back there was not difficult to me because I was looking back from a time that had become sunnier than the time that I wrote these notes. Mm-hmm. But the actual process, which I think is also part of your question for writing the book, I rewrote, looking back on those notes, I had to provide context just like I did before I read my initial passage. So over a 7-year period, I was going back and trying to fill in blanks so that to turn this thing into a book, because my thought is maybe this could help someone else, and certainly it could be a great history for our family and for Tommy's family and our friends. So over a period of time, I did add context to the book. I ultimately hired an editor who was very helpful to me, a guy named Stephen Caldwell, who was awesome, from Fayetteville. But then the other thing that was really helpful to me in terms of process, because we may have some aspiring authors on this call, was really having a few close friends that were good writers and readers to read it and critique it for me. And out of that process, names that I'll mention: Ashley and Kurt Kneckrem, Steve Graves, Elise Mitchell, Robert Lewis. I asked them to be honest with me, and what I learned is they had a lot of questions about, well, what were Tommy and Robin thinking? Because these were my notes, not their notes. So at 7 years after the fact, I was able to go to them and ask them to write reflections at the end of each chapter for their perspectives. And I think it added a huge boost in to the book, because that's what people wanted to know. What were Tommy and Robin thinking at the time? So the book was published about 2 years ago after that iterative process, and there were a lot of people involved. And now we kind of carry on beyond the book with, we have a website, flipstory.com, and on that website, for anybody that's listening, we have resources that can help them if their lives have been flipped, or somebody else that they know. So I would encourage everybody to check out that site. But that was our process.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody to check out the website too. I think it's there's just so much there. And when you're reading the book, you know, one of the things that you did, Mark, was, you know, you said to me when we were talking, I think in our first meeting, you said you read the book, so well, you know Tommy now, and you really convey a sense of who he is and who your family are. And it makes me want to see them. And there's a video of them on the site. And so it's just this nice connection of doing that as well, that you feel connected to the people that the real people in the book. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
So Tommy, what about you? What about your process?
Well, my process, kind of haphazard, really. I've always enjoyed writing. And I had just started going out with a woman, Mary Connor, who I'll call MC from now on. I was just started dating her at the time, but I've been with her ever since. So about almost 7 years. But I had a therapist at Psychiatric Research Institute who asked me to do two things. And he said, one is, I want you to write a letter to Will. And two, I want you to write in fairly specific detail about the day that it happened, everything. And even stuff that you don't want other people to read, but that, you know, that you need to keep, you know, inside. In the way that he said that there are a couple of reasons to do this. One is because it's like filing away a file. It's like, especially right after tragedy, you've got all these things jumbled in your mind. And so it's getting in the way of all your other thoughts. He says, if you put it on paper, then it's like you can file it away and you can access it when you want it, but it doesn't get in the way of everything else when you don't. So I already had a fairly lengthy bunch of language about the day that all happened. And so, but that had been kind of in the tank for a long time. But so anyway, I did that exercise. I told my girlfriend MC about it. So for Father's Day, she got me a journal, and because she knew that I liked to write, obviously. And so for whatever reason, I used poetry as the whatever medium genre to use to express my feelings. On all these flights from Southwest Airlines from Little Rock to Houston, I'd see Mark on these flights and be sitting over there scribbling away in my journal, and he'd be over there talking to a buddy he was having a beer, and I'd be, you know, up here, you know, right. But anyway, so I wrote these poems and I shared them with my family and MC and some other people, and they thought that they were really good. And they felt like, you know, that I should try to get them published. They might help someone. I thought, well, that might be, you know, good to do at some point. And so then an old friend of mine I saw had started a blog, and I called her up and I said, "How do you start a blog?" Because I want to write a blog about, what I've been writing poetry about. So I started the blog Foltz, and it was, there's no question it was therapy for me. But what was bigger therapy for me is that when I would go out, inevitably every time MC and I would go out to dinner, somebody would come up and say, "I love what you're writing. Keep doing it." Which that would kind of double down on kind of my healing, I guess. But then when they would come up and say, "Hey, love what you're writing," I've recommended it to a friend of mine who's struggling. That really just kind of made me think, maybe there's something I can do here to help, because I thought about starting a foundation and all those kinds of things, but I just didn't really feel like I was in the spot where I could do that, and not really equipped and not really all completely bought in on it. So I wanted to do, what I could do, just speaking, not as a mental health expert, because I'm not at all, but just from this experience of a man who's lost a son. And I was told that my blog material is really compelling, but that it needs to be put into a memoir format. And I wasn't comfortable with that for a long time, but I got comfortable with it. So ultimately, that's what the format is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Something that you spoke about there made me think of how you spoke about this, and Mark, it's in your book too, of how oftentimes when someone goes through a devastating event, people around them don't necessarily know how to react or how to respond. They can feel awkward, not know what to say or not to say, what to do or not to do. And both of you have told me, and I'd just like you to talk a little bit more about it, Tommy, how you just really, you were very open from the beginning and didn't really feel like the stigma affected you. And Mark, you talked about how, people that would go to visit Tommy, because Tommy had tons of visitors. That's something that's just throughout the book, as you talk about how much support he had, but how people would be maybe a little bit afraid of what's it going to be like, right? And I wonder if each of you could maybe speak a little bit more about your experience with that.
Yeah, I would imagine that my experience is a lot different than Mark's. Number one, because he has a book published and I don't. But just it's just a different situation. But it's obviously, I'm very close to both of them, and so is Mark, which makes this panel kind of unique. I
want to point that out, Tommy, real quick, is that you guys know each other. So that was kind of alluded to, of seeing, you would see each other on the plane, but just for the viewers, these two guys go way back.
About 52, 53 years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So where were we on telling the truth? I mean, we decided, I wrote, it's hard to even say these words, but when I was writing my son's obituary, we decided that we were going to be up front and frank. It was the truth, and we had actually talked to a good friend of Mark and Vicky's, whose son had overdosed or, kind of committed suicide by overdose, however you want to call it. And they addressed it up front in their obituary of their son. And we thought that was probably the best way to handle it. And it was not by design, believe me. But what it did was eliminated a lot of the rumor mill, the stuff that makes stigmas what they are. Mm-hmm. We didn't experience any of that. I mean, because we were open and honest with our community, they didn't think we had anything to hide. I mean, we laid it out all out on the table because we did that, and we weren't we were shooting straight with them. They came, rushed around us, and it was, a wonderful group of friends, that just came to our aid, and, with no stigma whatsoever. I think some of it has to be handled in a way that it needs to be handled. But, like I say, if not by design, I mean, having rumor mill get tamped down, that never even entered my mind thinking but after the fact, it tells me kind of what I needed to know about it. And that is that everybody's ready to move on to the next thing. What was wrong with him rather than how did he do it? What was wrong with him? So you get the first big part of it, get the elephant out of the room, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, keep going.
I'm good.
Are you okay? Well,
Oops, we lost your sound, Mark.
You're still muted, Mark.
Yep, Mark. Yeah, not sure. Mm-mm.
It's still on Mary's. Now it's on.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, now we can.
Yeah, I think the link just got busy or something. I don't know, but Robin Van Zant, Tommy's wife, who is a hero and a champion, she would say, never take a tough journey alone.
Mm.
And she and Tommy from the beginning and our whole family welcomed the community and friends that helped us. And we have, it's just been such a blessing. It's hard to really express. And I think the sense of community has helped to lift our family up, and certainly Tommy, from that day until this. It's now been 11 and a half years since Tommy fell.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just say that anybody that deals with a tragedy, and sadly, most of us are flipped sometime in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
is don't take that journey alone, and let people love on you, and be open and be vulnerable and transparent. And that allows them to help lift you up.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn, you can return the favor.
Yes, I love that, Mark. Let them love on you and let them lift you up, and then it does flow you forward. I had a question that is actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask you both. Community, obviously, people, friends, was super important for you guys. But faith is something that was also extremely important. And our questioner wants to know, what role do you think that faith plays in helping people heal from trauma?
Tommy, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll go first since you're the ordained one.
No.
No, Mark and I have had a lot of conversations on religion and spirituality through the years, and he'll probably tell you that my views on religion are mixed at best, but I'm a very faithful and spiritual person, and I've always believed in that. I mean, it didn't take to believe that, but I just refuse to believe that my son is 6 feet under the ground and that's it. I just don't believe it. And that's an article of faith. I just don't believe it. And part of the reason, and this is, you read this in the book when it gets published, but I had several kind of supernatural experiences right in the kind of aftermath of Will's death that they were very uplifting, and I felt his presence there several times that I won't go into detail on it right now, but some things that are pretty convincing that something was going on there that not normal. And so that makes me, I don't think those things are happening just as a coincidence that Will, went to heaven before they happened to me. So, but if faith, I mean, you have to believe that there's something bigger than you. I recently lost my mom, lost my stepdad about a year before I lost Will. When you get in that generation, you're the oldest generation in your town, and then you're about to, soon enough to be the oldest generation of your family. It feels kind of lonely out there sometimes, but it's it's an interesting, the grieving process of losing a child versus losing a parent is completely different. But anyway, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I would say that faith is a huge part of dealing with a tragedy, can be a huge part. And I would say that I would encourage, since we all are going to probably be flipped by something sometime, cancer or illness, loss of a loved one, job loss, there's just a lot of ways to be flipped in life. That my advice to anyone, my sons, my grandchildren, anybody who would want to hear is develop your faith before you're in the tragedy, if you can. And now one never knows when anything's going to happen. That's what Tommy just expressed. He had a faith before the tragedy. Tommy Van Zandt had a faith before the tragedy. Vicky, my wife, had a faith before the tragedy. So, but in addition to that, I think as Christians, we live, or called to live, 1 foot in today and 1 foot in eternity, every day. And the part that lives in eternity is hope. And so every day there's always hope. And sometimes in a dark place or a dark tunnel of a tragedy, it's very hard to even see beyond right now. And so you don't know how the story's going to end up, but there's always hope. And so that comes from faith, and it made all the difference in the world to our family. And I think starting then and to this very day, it's been a major part of our lives. It is who we are.
Can you talk a little bit more about that specifically? One thing that I had mentioned to you and when we talked was the idea that I came across from a book of that faith is a verb. It's not something that it's a belief you have or you don't have, but as it being something that you actively live. Can you speak a little bit more about that, maybe, Mark?
Sure.
The how of it?
Yes, I think, well, as I say, I mean, I really believe in the one day at a time. And so each day during this period of time, I would get up and have my own quiet time with the Lord. And I would be asking for guidance. What do we do now? Where should Tommy go to the rehab hospital? How are we going to pay these bills? Who's going to help us with, where do we find a wheelchair? What do we do? And so those are action-oriented terms that are just day-to-day life when you're living in a difficult time. And so the faith part is, putting that to the Lord in prayer and then expecting an answer. That's the hope. And if you expect the answer, even though you don't even know what you're going to do that day, for sure, when you get up from that time, it's moving forward. And there's the tragedy really would be if you couldn't move forward, right? To stay in the dark place and not try to move forward. As Tommy has described, he was moving forward. You have to move forward. And even though you don't know the ultimate destination or the ultimate outcome, and that's faith and that's hope.
Yeah, beautifully put. Which brings me to ask about how, and this I want to direct to both of you, from the intro of your book, Mark, you talk about the word paralysis, and just if you sit with that, what a terrifying word that is. And with Tommy, there was physical paralysis, which was pretty terrifying. But you also speak to there being emotional paralysis and spiritual paralysis. And I know from my work with people that oftentimes it's that place where people too become stuck, right, somewhere in their healing process, that they're really suffering and they need help. They need to reach out to someone who can help get them unstuck. So I wanted to ask both of you, did you ever have moments or longer periods where you did feel some of that paralysis or feeling stuck? And did writing, or maybe it was writing, or maybe it was something else, what helped you to get unstuck?
Tommy?
It's tough to say. I mean, I definitely had, I can write a book, absolute paralysis.
Mm-hmm,
And a lot of it is based on, little things like, what is the tone of my book? I mean, it's a very serious subject, but, I don't want it to be too long because, talking 110 pages or something like that. Just because I don't think people have that in them to read that much about it. But I don't know I've lost my train of thought there.
Well, you were talking, we had mentioned paralysis, and you were kind of referencing it to how in the writing process there can be, what we commonly say maybe writer's block, but also just a being stuck, right, somewhere in that process.
I kind of, I'm kind of polar on that, because there'll be times when I won't pick it up for 3 months, and then there'll be times when I won't put it down for 2 weeks. And, it's hard to make a living doing that if you're not getting paid to be spending all that time doing it. But it's like, it's a labor of love. And it's something that, for me anyway, I just felt like it's a story that I needed to tell for some closure.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't really touched on it, but I mean, there's a reason that the book is called Forward instead of it's based on a couple of songs by U2. One of them called Walk On. Very positive lyrics. Walking on or moving on seems negative to me. Moving forward seems positive. Mm-hmm. And moving forward means you're taking your loved one with you to go explore the rest of your life. But moving beyond means just not thinking about it anymore. Mm-hmm. I don't want to not think about Will. Mm-hmm. Think about him every day, and I want to for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. So, writing this has been therapeutic on a number of levels. I mean, just, writing it, coming back to it 6 months later and rereading it and it's being pleasantly surprised, thinking it's actually pretty good after 6 months. But there's also, I get back to those, some of the scenes, that I recall from his lifetime here and my time with him, and, send you right back into, a cradle of tears. Mm-hmm. And that's, which is fine. I've one thing that I've talked to a couple of other groups about this kind of subject. And, one thing I would say is never, ever, ever stop yourself from crying. I mean, you can't cry forever, but you got to let it loose. And frankly, for me, because of the kind of woman that I've got a long-term relationship with, it was easier for me to cry in front of her than at my home alone. Mm-hmm. Because I couldn't imagine being that fly on the wall and seeing a grown man, toppled over his mantle, crying alone. And so I'd stop myself, and that's bad. It's unhealthy to do that. Mm-hmm. But, we're all only human. But when there's someone there who gets what you're going through, and understands it. I mean, it made it a whole lot easier for me to have someone like Robin was talking about, have somebody to walk through it with. And I've had a lot of people to walk through my deal with me, but MC is first among them.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said a lot of really important stuff there, Tommy, and I'm having to just pause for a moment, really, to just let it sit there with what you said. There's so many pieces of, just how important it is to let yourself cry, how you got to feel what you feel, right? Otherwise, we do get stuck. I think that's when the stuck happens, is when we shut it down and don't have that opportunity to really feel through it. And I also love how you said, your process that really, to me, helps me and hopefully people who are watching to see how, there's not an instruction book for how to do this, right?
Well, there's one that's kind of close that I got the other day, but I think the best advice is what Mark gave me about 6 months ago, and that is get an editor.
Well, that too, right? Yeah, at some point
A little bit.
In the writing, right? You may spend really 2 intense weeks with it and then put it aside for 6 months. And that too is maybe how your individual healing path happens, right? And so just letting yourself have your own process of how that writing happens and how that helps you to heal. I think that's an important thing for people to hear.
Well, and one of the things that I, kind of plan to say is that, I don't know, the longer from the event, I mean, like there's a lot of the poetry that are very, very raw. I mean, as Mark said, very honest, very raw, and a lot of everything else I've read is pretty raw, and it's because a lot of it's written so much closer to the actual event.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's kind of like I'm almost stuck, psychologically between, do I really want to finish this because I'm closing the book on Will? Because that's not what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time I can't let this thing keep hanging out there.
Mm-hmm.
I've just got to wrap it up and get it done. And as we discussed yesterday or Thursday, I guess, Mary, there's a time when you have to say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I think that I'm pretty close to that. So hopefully if I'm back next year, I'll actually have a book to talk about.
Awesome. Maybe we'll all get to do it again, Tommy. That would be great. Well, Mark, do you want to speak at all to that question of your experience with emotional or spiritual paralysis, either in moments or longer periods, or even just, how that's been for other people that you know?
Yes, I'm happy to. I think I will first say we all had our down days, mm-hmm. Tommy included. I mean, Tommy's about as a positive, upbeat person as you could ever meet. But you all have tough days. And honestly, there was a period of time when I really expected Tommy to become depressed, mm-hmm. Which I think would be perfectly natural. Mm-hmm. with what he was dealing with, and I was kind of guarding for that. Mm-hmm. But it didn't happen. I will say that just to kind of take that forward, Tommy has confided in me, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this, but I think the hardest time for him was, he spent, after a month at Washington Regional, he was 7 months in the rehab hospital in Denver, and mm-hmm. we would shuttle invite friends to come see him on the weekends and family and all that to try to keep it from being such a long, hard time for him because his family was all in Fayetteville, mm-hmm. but he still had the nights. And so he talked about to me at some length about how hard that was some nights, and then basically almost like wrestling with God in prayer. Mm-hmm. Where he was dealing with what had happened to him and concerned about what would happen to him and his family.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of all that, I mean, Tommy had, as I said, had a faith going into this, but he was just like all the rest of us. He was a man struggling with his situation. And he, through that process, came out with a much deeper faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks today like total surrender to his circumstance and peace.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean he's, you know, wallowing in that. He's moved forward. Our book has a lot of great parts, and the whole back half of the book is moving forward, not the tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
but how do we move forward to have productive, fruitful lives, all of us, and including and especially Tommy and Robin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened. So it is a victorious story, but it came through a gut-wrenching, dark time. And that's what it looked like for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's kind of essential to know that when we are in those gut-wrenching dark times, right, that there is process going on, and we kind of have to let that happen too, which is really hard. But when we let that happen, we do move forward in some way. Yeah. So that kind of, makes me think about the 5 stages of grief. And what's now been added is a 6th stage of grief. So a lot of people are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work about the different stages that people go through, and not linearly, but just the kind of things that people experience of denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And you guys have touched on those at various points, right? We've had those have come up in the conversation. But her colleague and close friend, David Kessler, with their permission, added this 6th stage of grieving, which is meaning. And that it really came to mind as you were talking about both of you, that to you, Tommy, moving forward has a really different meaning than moving on or getting beyond. And Mark, the thought about how, how do we live now? Not what happened, but how do we live now in the moment that we're in? And so maybe I think we've got about 10 minutes left. That might be a nice way to kind of end things, is the meaning making part of the grief process. So I'm just going to leave it with that and see where you guys take that.
I'll just say that I have not experienced the denial phase. I mean, there's no way I could.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also not experienced the anger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not angry at God. I'm not angry at the world. I'm not angry at Will, certainly. It's just, these things happen to people, and you never want it to happen to you. But I mean, there's a whole laundry list of titans of industry and, politicians and everyone else who suffered through great tragedy have gone on to do great things.
Right.
And, why should I be any luckier than those people who suffered their tragedy? I don't feel like was born under any kind of blessed star, said my life was going to go perfect till I died. Might think that way when you're 21, but not at 55.
Well, I'll share just sort of what it looks like for Tommy today.
Okay.
So it takes about 4 hours for people to get Tommy up and dressed and ready for work, fed, bathed, etc. Every day pre-COVID that he could, which is almost every day. he was in the office. And what Tommy's doing now is he looks at his life as a ministry, and it starts with his family, his caregivers, and I hear it over and over again. He has a 7/24 team. If his ventilator goes off, he can't breathe, so somebody has to be there to watch him and help him. And the people around him learn so much from Tommy. His attitude, he loves on them. Okay, so he's looking outward, not inward. He's gonna. If you were to meet with him today, he would probably create some joke to make fun of himself, just be totally disarming, and he's looking out. And so when he goes to the office, the people line up at his office. There are maybe 60 people in our office in Northwest Arkansas, and it's like the old Snoopy cartoon, the doctor is in. And they would line up and they come to him for advice. They come to him for training, and he is looking out. And that's what the sixth stage looks like to him. We have come through all these other processes, and we're not looking back anymore, except to try to help somebody else that may be in one. So that's where we are, and really that's why I named my book Flipped. Is, initially it was the obvious. Tommy was flipped off a ladder, landed on his head, and was paralyzed. When he was flipped, our lives were flipped. And now this tragedy has been flipped into a triumph and a new life. And we're moving forward, and we're not asking why. We know a lot of bad things happen to good people all the time, just like Tommy said. Well, so we're moving forward, and it's onward and upward for us.
Yeah, well said, Mark. In that, what you said and what Tommy said. We know that bad things happen to good people, right? And Tommy, that not expecting that. Into every life, a little rain must fall, right? When we don't have that expectation, then we can move into acceptance more easily when we're not fighting that this thing happened to me, not taking it personally in a way, even though it very much happens to us, it's not personal. Yeah.
Well, I think that all of it all of what we've been talking really comes back to, at least for me, one of the central points of my book is don't be the victim, period. Just that's kind of point number one. The umbrella over the whole book is don't be the Will was the victim, not me. So being, allowing yourself to be the victim is allowing yourself to feel sorry for yourself. And you can do that for a while, but you can fight the world if you want to, but you're never going to win that battle. Never. So why waste the time on it? So.
Yeah, I had marked in Mark's book, which I'll hold up for you guys to see. This is the cover of the book. The quote you said, God has carried us through. As Tommy put it, God doesn't cause bad things to happen, but God is there to pick you up when bad things do happen. And that seems to be what kind of what's being said here too, is it wasn't caused, but God can be there to pick you up when bad things do happen. Yeah.
Well, we all have a choice. We all have a choice to choose God or not choose God, and we have a choice to be a victim or not be a victim. And so we choose God, and we choose moving forward.
Yes. Well, is there anything else that you guys would like to share or get across to our viewers today? I really appreciate the honesty and authentic quality that you both brought to the session today and to your books. We've all talked about how that's so important. and having any credibility with a reader is your authenticity about what it was like, that there were times that were awful and hard, and yet you both have shown how you can live through and make meaning and thrive after that. I just want to open it and see if there's anything else you guys want to put out there.
I think that's it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I didn't comment on the process of writing the book, but my good friend Robert Lewis, when I was just about finished and spent all the money and the time with the editor and 7 years, I almost pulled the plug on the book. And the reason I did is I had a lot of doubts about it because it was so personal. I didn't want to be out there. We're gregarious people, but we are not out there with our personal life type people, you know? So I was concerned about it, and Robert looked at me and laughed. And he's an author that's published many books. And he said, he quoted Winston Churchill, who was also a prolific author. And he said, Winston Churchill said, writing a book is like giving birth to barbed wire. And we laughed, and it is hard. Tommy's just about to give birth right now. And Robert encouraged me to say, just put your ideas in play. It's never perfect. You can write things, and then a few years later, you wish you'd said it maybe a little better or differently. But it's a process, and it is cathartic, as Tommy has mentioned, to work through these emotions. And and hopefully it's cathartic for people to read it, because it has to be genuine. And I know I've read Tommy's draft, and he's read my book, and you know, we had to be genuine, because if it really is going to be of help to someone in a dark time, it's just part of it.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much. And I want to just let our viewers know that Mark's book can be purchased at Wordsworth Books, or on the Six Bridges website, or on the Flipped Story website. So flippedstory.com is their website. And the proceeds will then go to help the Van Zant Family Fund that helps support all of the care that Tommy requires, that 24/7 care that Mark mentioned that's necessary for him. We all love Amazon. But when you purchase their book, for sure, on Amazon, they get maybe 40 cents for that. So we're just going to put in that plug of buying from independent booksellers and buying from flipstory.com. And Tommy, we look forward to being able to buy your book. Yes, I know. I really look forward to that, and hang in there with that. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That's, as I shared with you, one of my favorite mantras as well. Keep watching, folks. There's plenty more to come with the Six Bridges Book Festival. You can go online and register for more events. And we certainly hope that you enjoyed and got something from this conversation today. I certainly know I did. And it's just been such a pleasure to be able to meet you, Tommy and Mark, and get to hear about your stories. So I really thank you for being here today and being willing to put yourself out.
Appreciate it,
Mary. We appreciate being asked, and we thank you for your time and professionalism and encouragement. So we are grateful.
Yep.
Well, you're most welcome. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Farewell, everyone.